A warm welcome to all of you hardy Minnesotans, and thank you for coming out on another cold and snowy winter night. I'm Colleen Pittner, AIGA's Programming Director for the Insights Lecture Series and Co-Director for Education. Can you believe that AIGA Minnesota and the Walker Art Center have been co-sponsoring the Insights Lecture Series for 24 years? I hate to admit it, but I was around for those first planning meetings when we came up with the lecture series idea as a way to keep Minnesota designers from going crazy during March. I think it worked because all of you look pretty sane to me. Before we get started, I have a few announcements about some exciting upcoming events. Mark your calendars for Thursday, March 14th from 6 to 9 p.m. This is the date of the 2009 AIGA Design Show reception, which will be held at the Weisman Art Museum. The exhibit highlights the region's top design work that has been judged by a panel of nationally recognized design professionals. On Thursday, March 26th, the fourth event in the SO series for emerging designers will be held at the Minnesota Center for Book Arts at 6 p.m. And finally, AIGA's 16th annual Portfolio One-on-One event will be held on April 24th and 25th at Solera in downtown Minneapolis. Over the course of 2 days, students interact with professional designers during studio tours, portfolio reviews, and workshops. Students are also given the opportunity to submit their work for scholarship awards. This is a not-to-be-missed opportunity to participate in the country's largest portfolio reviewing event. Now for our main event tonight. It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Andrew Blauvelt, who is the design director at the Walker Art Center. Andrew and his remarkable design team have worked tirelessly to bring us the amazing array of speakers we will hear over the next 4 weeks. AIGA is deeply grateful for all of their efforts, which has made this lecture series possible. For me, working with them was like going to design heaven. Please join me in giving a rousing round of applause to Andrew Blauvelt.
Thank you, Colleen. Most people say design hell, but it could be a little bit of both. I'd like to welcome everyone to Insights 2009. We have a few more design-related announcements, kind of a cavalcade of announcements, but I hope you'll bear with me. The Walker and AIGA Minnesota will actually present 2 regional premieres of 2 design-related films. The first one will screen Thursday, April 30th at 7 and 9 p.m., and that is the film Objectified, which is by the director Gary Hitzwit, who was the director of the film Helvetica. And it's a new documentary about product design and industrial design with all the usual and unusual suspects in it. It will be premiering next week at South by Southwest. So we're happy to bring that here to the Twin Cities, and that'll be joined about a month later at the end of May, Thursday, May 28th, also with a 7 and 9 o'clock screening of a new documentary of the designer Milton Glaser called To Inform and Delight. And those would be exclusive premieres in the Twin Cities area, so we hope that you can get your tickets. We will have the director of both films here to introduce the film, and there will be a Q&A after the 7 p.m. screening. So that's good information for you to know. If you want to be part of that, you can buy the 7 o'clock tickets. And those should be available online at our ticketing site at walker.org. Oh, I should also say that those two programs are both on Thursday night, and they're part of Target Free Thursday nights at the Walker, sponsored by Target, of course. Another announcement was that actually our shop is now staying open till 7 p.m. on Tuesday nights. So if you want any related material, some of the guests this year have books and magazines and other things, and they'll be available at the shop. Sometimes they were out in front, but now they're at the shop, but they'll be open till 7 o'clock, so you can do that shopping then. Next week, we will, as part of Insights, we will bring David Reinfurt. We'll be here to discuss his work in two different ventures. One is his own design practice called ORG, and another in a collaborative venture called Dexter Sinister, which operates out of New York City. I was trying to supply some text about Dexter Sinister and trying to describe them. It's a new kind of experimental hybrid format for graphic design practice or design practice that's part publishing, alternative publisher, research unit, and ventures into artistic practice. They were recently included in the last Whitney Biennial, for example. And so if you're into the edgy and what's on the verge of graphic design, then I would highly encourage you to come to that lecture. You may be familiar with Dexter Sinister because they've taken over the publishing of ... magazine, which many of you might be familiar with. And he is in that venture with Stuart Bailey, who was here a couple of years ago as part of Insights. ORG and David's background is also in electronic media and reactive media, so it would also be interesting for those folks interested in that. And then the final series will conclude with two more lectures. We will have an exclusive appearance in the US by Experimental Jet Set, and I understand there's a few tickets left, so if you're hedging your bets, you might want to make it tonight, actually at the box office. I think that will sell out very shortly. And then Ellen Lupton, who many of you should be familiar with from Baltimore, who runs the graduate program at MICA, is the author of many books, including several in a series on DIY, do-it-yourself design, and of course typography and graphic design, and a designer in her own right, and a curator. She does it all basically, and that's why she won the AIGA Gold Medal a couple years ago. And another exclusive arrangement, Ellen doesn't get out that much, so 2 exclusive dates. Also to remind you that all the lectures will be streamed live on the Walker channel, and all of the lectures for the last several years actually are available not only on the Walker channel, which is part of the Walker's website, but it's also now available at iTunes U. So another resource. And finally, I'd like to thank Colleen Pittner and Jennifer Weston at AIG Minnesota for helping plan and promote this year's lecture series. So, sorry, now I need a drink. Too many announcements. We'll take a little intermission. So this evening, of course, tonight's guests are Nicole Doughton and Eric Olson of Process Type Foundry, a Minneapolis-based type design studio. Even though the title of this series, well, the one I gave it, which was Avant la lettre, literally before the letter, was really more of an afterthought, it seems to make sense for tonight's speakers in particular. Indeed, what comes before the letter? For those who think that the letter is writing, the answer is speech. For those of you who think writing is secondary, the answer is pre-verbal thought. For designers, the simple answer to what comes before the letter is the typographer. Designing letter forms, whether for widespread use or for proprietary use, Process Type Foundry continues a tradition that reaches back to the invention of movable type. Their collection of typefaces, from custom fonts to broader releases such as Bryant, FIG, or FIG, I'm not sure the pronunciation that you guys use for that, Clavicus, Locator, or Stratum can all be found all over town and abroad, from the Walker to Facebook, Chevrolet to the New York Times Magazine. It's a particular pleasure to welcome Nicole and Eric this evening. I first met Eric before Process Type Foundry, when he was a designer here at the Walker, and later when he submitted Locator to the Twin Cities Typeface competition, which was sponsored by the now defunct Design Institute, where he later served as a design fellow. Nicole, his partner, recently received her MA from the University of Reading in England, one of the few programs devoted to serious type design training. Operating from various homes, and I forgot to check with you before this, so I'm sure I missed a few. St. Paul, rural Minnesota, Is that right? Okay. There was an undisclosed location at one point, which either could have been Wisconsin or rural Minnesota. England, and now Minneapolis, and soon to be Golden Valley. You're really spreading out there. Process Type also shares an interest of mine in prefabricated architecture. Therefore, I thought it would be fitting to conclude this introduction with a quote by Gerrit Nordjes, who is a teacher at the Royal Academy of Arts in The Hague, who once declared that typography is writing with prefabricated letters. Please help me welcome Nicole and Eric from Process Type Foundry.
Thanks, Andrew. That was very nice. And thank you guys so much for coming tonight. We're from Minnesota, so we've been to probably as many design lecture series as you have, so it's just great to be here, and we're really honored to be here.
Yeah, can we have that?
That's our dog. So tonight we're going to just present, we're going to start by presenting background of the Foundry. And then after that, of course, we're going to talk about typefaces. It's a pretty simple presentation structure. But in between each one, there were kind of some things that we wanted to talk about, but we didn't quite know how to fit them in. So we just slotted them in between typefaces, and they sort of became known as interruptions because we couldn't think of anything better to call them.
Fair enough. Okay, so to put our type design in context, it's necessary just to back up just for a second. Nicole and I went to school as graphic designers. We're trained as graphic designers. And, we entered the field as graphic designers. And, one of the things that ran through our work, for whatever reason, was type a lot. And our work tended to be type heavy, tended to focus on that a lot. And, this is late 90s. We were schooled in the mid 90s, so late 90s, 2000. And of course, maybe one of the reasons for this is Immigrant Magazine. And, when we were students, Immigrant Magazine was the center of graphic design discussion in the United States. And important there as well is that it was free as a student. So, every 3 months, this amazing magazine showed up in our mailbox, and it was really a spark. And outside of the graphic design discussion, what's important to note here is that, of course, Immigrant was a type foundry, still is a type foundry. And it seemed, the thing about Immigrant is it made it seem possible, and it made it seem like, there's these two people doing this thing. It seemed like, yeah, all right, this is possible. So that's the beginning. And so from there, we can kind of move forward a little bit here.
So now that we're type designers, there aren't that many of us in the world. And so when we are sort of out in the world and we try to describe what it is we do, it gets a little bit difficult. And when you say, I'm a type designer, people get this sort of confused glare comes over their face. So we've developed a tactic to try to describe what we do. And it's this, as we say, when you're in Word and you're choosing a font, and let's say you're looking for Helvetica or Times New Roman, those things, Helvetica, those are the kinds of things that we design, fonts. And usually when we say fonts, that sort of helps them get it, or they sort of politely turn away and just drop the subject completely. So first, this is a terrible slide, whatever. It's the best I could do.
You'll see why.
You'll see why. So interestingly, the sort of debate that has long happened in graphic design about the role of self-authored work and the role of sort of self-initiated projects has absolutely no relevance in type design. There's a long history in type design of designers starting their own projects and doing self-initiated work. And what makes that work for a type designer is that they then take that project that they started themselves and then they sell it to other graphic designers or a general public, et cetera. So essentially, that's what we do. We design those typefaces, those sort of self-initiated projects, and then we sell them on our website, and we sell fonts. We also do custom work, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but we're not good at getting clients. We have clients, and we work with clients, we like having clients, but actually getting a client, as graphic designers have to sort of hustle to get clients, to get new work.
Yeah.
That was never for us. So that's one of the reasons that we really didn't succeed in the freelance graphic design world, because we didn't want to
Yeah.
get clients.
Props to all. Yeah. No, seriously, props to all the freelancers in the audience. Tough stuff.
So because we sell products, our business has much more of a basis in products rather than services. And what this means is that when you sell a service, let's say this represents a year of work on an identity for a big company, or this could be a custom typeface. You'll see these green chunks represent payments, and when that time is done, all of this design work, your time, expenses is completely paid for, and you move on to the next project. With a typeface in particular, you can see there's no nice little green chunks in this development time. All of the time and expense that it goes to create that typeface is really on the back of the type designer. And when a type design sells, when a typeface actually sells, which is these little green points again, that's what that pays for in the beginning, is that it pays that type designer back for that design and development time and their expenses. Now, eventually, when you get out all the way over here, what happens is eventually you begin to turn a profit, right? You've paid back all of this expense, and now you're getting into profit. That's the ideal scenario, though, of course. A typeface gains more and more momentum, more and more people see it, it gets more and more marketing, and so it succeeds, and you then turn a profit. On the other hand, and we've disguised the identity of Eric's typeface name so you don't know who's who. On the other hand, it also, in reality, probably happens more often that a typeface doesn't ever actually pay that development time back, and it doesn't perhaps do so well for whatever reason that is. So there's a lot of risk that goes into putting a typeface design out, and you in the end you could hit it big, you could also never make that money back.
Okay, so as we alluded to in the beginning with our initials in Helvetica and the lawn there, we have another member of the studio. He's not here with us tonight.
He wanted to come, but he had a prior engagement.
He's an important factor in the studio, and so we had to include him. He's a calming force at the studio, but he's also kind of a wild man.
You can see he's a terrible hire because he just lounges around, sleeps during work, and of course eats Eric's work.
Okay, so Nicole and I are, in terms of how we fell into type design, are really polar opposites of one another. And I say fell into because that is literally pretty much how every type designer becomes a type designer. It's really not something you set out to do. It's something that kind of happens. And we arrived at it in completely different ways. I'm entirely self-taught, and Nicole has a master's in typeface design, which is pretty rare these days. So, being self-taught. Well, when you're self-taught, you start entirely at the bottom. So let's start there, and we'll kind of work our way through that. I started making typefaces as a graphic designer. I started making them when I was a student at the U of M. And I couldn't afford typefaces, so I made typefaces for myself. And of course, I had no idea what I was doing. And so what you do when that's the case, you make typefaces out of pieces. And this is, you could marginally call this drawing. And this is simply a screen grab from Illustrator. I guess, I started out drawing fonts in Illustrator. It's not something I do now, but this is pretty straight ahead. They're simply modular pieces that are kind of glued together, and you make a letter, and then from that, you make another letter. And, I did this all the time, and I kind of couldn't stop doing it. I became obsessed with it, and it was something, in years later, it was more of a focus of my work than actually being a graphic designer. And it was sort of at that point when I had 0 clients as a freelancer that I realized I should maybe look into other things. This is totally just a typical example. I have hundreds of these things. A lot of them aren't even complete alphabets. And I would just use them in my work, and kind of on it would go. And maybe visually at least successful of some of these earlier works of mine. This is actually a typeface that is still available. It's called Kettler. And it was just in tribute to Bud Kettler, the creator of Courier, kind of the workhorse favorite of monospace fonts. And yeah, this is just an example of early modular work that was carried a little further and turned into something workable. Again, another example, this is pretty early on. This is Fig Script, a typeface that I created. And, you know, the influence is obvious. I actually just pasted this into, you know, a little word processing program, and it's simply ASCII art, and I was kind of taken with that at the time. But, you know, a lot of these early fonts, they were just impulsive. They were just straight away. That's, you know, they were done sometimes in a matter of days or weeks, and that was that. So that's kind of how I got started, and I built from there. But built being the key word, it was a long ways.
So this is some graphic design work that is using Fig Script. You can see that that's right there. We like to show in-use work, because when you see type design specimens like what Eric showed before, they really sort of aim to present the typeface in a neutral setting. It's in some ways a very sterile setting. So we like to show it sort of in the quote-unquote real world. And you'll also see that the design credits are down at the bottom. And I should point out, the design credits are down there because we didn't design any of this stuff. So we can't talk about the things that we would like to talk about a design piece, why they made the decision that they made, why they chose the fonts, why they said it the way they did. We have no idea. But we like the work. So you can see this, the designer actually projected this onto the wall and then taped Fig up onto the wall. So this is actually in tape. And then this is a Swedish sort of fashion parents, kids magazine.
So this is a question that we get a lot, and I have to take the blame for this because I'm responsible for, you know, all of the strange font names. And I remember thinking this as a graphic designer, you know, really what's with all the strange font names. And so I have to come clean tonight and maybe explain that a little bit. Two of the names are fake, you know, of my typefaces, and I don't know if there's even really a reason for that, aside from other than keeping track of them. For instance, when previous to releasing Ciravec, there wasn't a single Google result for it, so that had to go into it as well. I don't know, I also broke my clavicle, maybe that went into Clavica. All the other names are real. Now, you know, naming a typeface is very difficult. It's actually one of the hardest parts of designing a typeface, and it doesn't seem like it would be, but the thing about it is a name should be reflective of the design. And it should also, in an ideal situation, show off the best letters of the design. So then after that happens, you should maybe consider the copyright as well. Well, after that, there aren't really any options. And so fortunately, for instance, I could say something about Bryant. You know, Bryant was designed when we lived just a few blocks away from here on Bryant. So, and speaking of Bryant, so to get into the background of that a little bit, I tend to think in parallels a lot. I wish that I could show you, you know, say a sketch that I came up with on a napkin one night while out, you know, having a wonderful dinner or something, and that then later turned into a final design. Unfortunately, that's not how I work. I tend to think in parallels, and I tend not always to draw influence from type design, but other fields as well. And in doing that, of course, one of the things that I'm interested in as a parallel in type design is how typefaces are used, and then how typefaces then you know, really become popular or just kind of fade away. And I think within there's something really interesting, and it is the last of those that I think there are things that are hidden. And you know, why do typefaces just fade away? Some of them are just forgotten. And so it was with that around this time that I was, you know, kind of gathering ideas for a typeface that I was reminded a lot of a designer who I'm very fond of, Roger Excoffon. He was a French designer. In the mid-1950s, he was the art director of Air France. And around this time, he drew a logotype for Air France, which was used up until quite recently. And what came out of that was a single typeface called Nord. And we're familiar, of course, with how Nord was later expanded. It became what we now know of as Antique Olive. And I've always been very taken with Antique Olive. for a lot of reasons, but I suppose primarily because it still strikes me as something that's incredibly progressive in terms of a sans serif. And you kind of have to move back a little bit to put it in its context. At the time, think Helvetica universe. We're thinking late 1950s, early 1960s. Now, Antique Olive came a little bit after that. It was kind of mid-60s when it was released. And for me, the thing that's so interesting about it is the terminals of Antique Olive are clipped. So if I can move the cursor here, you'll see on the A, for instance, on the A and the C. And that's unique in the sense of its relationship to, say, Helvetica or Universe. Now, those, of course, you're probably all pretty familiar with those. Instead of just being clipped, they go all the way around. And that's pretty basic. But the point is that what this allows the design to do is to sort of bleed into the other letters, or at least hint at a movement from left to right. And, of course, that's very common in a lot of faces, so you're thinking to yourself, maybe Gill Sans. But what's unique about Antique Olive is that it somehow maintains this progressive feel to it, and it does feel quite modern. And I've always loved the way it was actually used by its creator. Roger Escafan was also, I suppose, primarily more of a graphic designer. And, he has a lot of work similar to this. It's just very beautiful, and it's very much of its time in some ways, but I think it still really holds up. But this isn't really what probably a lot of us think of as Antique Olive now. This is what we think of when we hear Antique Olive. It was, of course, the logotype for Walmart up until very recently. Walmart just only recently replaced it with, actually I'm not sure what it is now, but, and I love this photograph because to me it's just the complete end of the road kind of photograph there. And it's just so desolate, and which is also why I had to include the photo of Mr. Cod. Mr. Cod is a chip shop, fish and chips. And it was up the street from where we used to live in England. And our friend Dan took this photograph. And I wanted to always love it, but Mr. Cod again said end of the road to me. Mr. Cod was like, nothing more says like I could care less about my health than eating at Mr. Cod. Now, how did this thing end up here? How did this amazing design, how did it sort of fall into these backwaters? And so it's kind of these thoughts that I have when I'm thinking things through and I'm kind of gathering ideas. And so it was with this that some of this thinking that led to Bryant. So just kind of so we're on the same page, this is a typeface of mine, Bryant. And so it was this thinking of things that had kind of fallen, to the side that led me here. This is Vagrant set just straight out of the box. This is, the version that you get from, Adobe Fontfolio. And I love how just unreasonably tightly set this thing is, just straight away. And so what this always did for me, and I have to set the stage a little bit, this is 2000, 2001 maybe, and this was always my association with, for lack of a better term, what we'll call a round font, which was kind of cheeky. These fonts set tight. They either reminded me of the 1970s or somehow like little plush books for kids or something.
Marshmallows.
Yeah, marshmallows. Well, I like marshmallows, but so here we are. This is Penrose Annual, 1971. This is always what I thought of as round fonts, and the reason I bring all of this up is that I always felt like there was a skeleton under here that there was something, there was much more to it than that, and like it hadn't really played, it hadn't really had its day, and it had sort of been, looked over. So this was on my mind at the time when thinking of Bryant. But I wasn't really doing anything with that. It was just an idea, so great. So it was around this time I was in the upstairs of Midway Books in St. Paul, and I found this book. And also at the time, I should say, I was sort of entertaining the idea that I could learn hand lettering. I'm here to say that never happened. I can't hand letter, especially not like on the cover of that book. But past all the beautiful examples of hand lettering was this. And so way in the back, page 179 here, was this very kind of quiet, understated take on this very kind of industrial sans serif. And I think I was really taken with it largely for the width of the caps and also what I think are really pretty beautiful numerals. And I was really taken aback by this because this had none of the associations that I was thinking of when I thought of, again, for lack of a better term, round fonts. And on the other page it said this: good lettering without skill. the Ryko system. So I'm like, perfect. I have zero skill, and awesome, this is for me. And then there was one more page. And this was simply some samples of results from the Ryko lettering kit. And so in a small nutshell, a Ryko kit is simply a set of templates and some pens. And you, with the pens, trace the templates, and voila, you have lettering. So here are the pens, there are the templates above there. And these are the examples. And so I thought, great, I'm going to get the book, away we go. And thinking, well, I'm going to get a Ryko. I'm going to look this up. I'm going to figure this out. Well, I never found one, and I couldn't find anything at the time. And so the idea just kind of faded away. But I was slowly sort of building things up. Again, all these parallels. That's how I do things, I suppose. And so naturally, another thing to point out would be router lettering. I've always really loved just how kind of naked and utilitarian these are. I mean, you used to be able to go to, say, for instance, a hardware store and have a sign made for your company. Another influence that has to go into the pile, AutoCAD lettering. For those familiar with it, there actually aren't any curves. You can see that on that size. You see the curves are actually rendered as straight lines. So I bring all of this up because, again, this is how I guess I gather ideas when I design typefaces. And it's after this that I suppose magic happens. I don't have a scanner. I don't do anything like that. I guess I start everything as a bunch of ideas, and then it eventually starts to work out, and these things kind of figure into how I'm thinking about things. And so that was how I arrived at this. This is another example of Bryant. So over the years, Bryant has been expanded and, contracted, and it's become smaller, or excuse me, it's become quite a bit larger, and it's been redrawn too over the years.
So yeah, here's some more in-use work with Bryant. Of course, this piece is Bryant. I think if Eric was talking about how round fonts had a sort of association, I think this really sort of shows, wow, there are other possibilities. I think this is really beautiful. It's very somber. It's very quiet. It's sort of exactly the opposite of what, Eric had initial reaction to those round fonts were. And then this is the inside. This is a fashion clothing store, primarily based in the UK. They have a couple stores otherwise, but here is Bryant. They've modified the tips a little bit. And this is their lettering on their flagship store in London. It's always neat to see 3D letters. And then Bryant sort of became into this pool of fonts that became sort of Web 2.0 fonts. So here it is. Here's Bryant again on the web, right here too.
I had to throw this in. One of the very early people to use Bryant, and it was really encouraging for me because I really wasn't sure where I was headed with things yet as a type designer, was my office mate at the time, Jean Purvey. And, obviously the idea totally upstages Bryant in this case. I mean, she could have used Courier, and it would be just as awesome. But every time I see it, I chuckle, so I had to include it. And this is my only copy of the photo, so it's a little small, but yeah, there she is. Okay, so of course what we're talking about here is what in at least web parlance is now referred to as the Metal Umlaut, which in many ways has been popularized by these guys right here. And so what we're speaking of course, is the diacritical mark for no grammatical reason at all.
But there is a reason.
Oh, there's a reason.
Oh yeah, it's the mystique.
Yeah.
I think personally a little European flair to the name. Yeah.
I think it's just mystery, really. But with guys with hair like that, there's a lot of mystery to go around. So, no, we're joking, of course, but a lot of what we do as type designers is pretty invisible, and there's a lot more than 26 characters in the alphabet, of course. And let's not even talk about numerals and punctuation. They're, a standard thing for us now is roughly around 1,000 per weight in terms of characters. And And it's an interesting thing because this has changed radically just in the time that we've been a Foundry. So, for instance, this is what we would have considered a normal accented set of characters in, say, 2003, and with PostScript Type 1. So, for anyone still familiar with that, that was simply the fonts that looked like a little suitcase, had a little printer file, and very, very primitive piece of technology. It was introduced in the mid-1980s. And it's literally unchanged since. And it's actually just a text file with an icon. It's also why they often would corrupt.
And it also had a max character limit of 256 characters.
Yeah.
So no matter how many accents you might have needed or how many diacritics you might have wanted to add, there was a limit, 256, done.
Yeah, which unfortunately had the side effect of being pretty Western-centric in terms of what it meant and who could use it. And so a lot of this was changed, of course, with the introduction of OpenType. Now, to get a little more particular, you could do this with TrueType, but OpenType really blew the doors open in terms of how the access to this many characters could be used in a better way. So, without getting too into it, this is more or less what we consider a standard set of accents at this point, and what is roughly referred to as extended Latin. So, this is kind of how we approach diacritics at this point.
So if PostScript was 256 characters, OpenType is what, 65,000 characters?
A little over 65,000. Yeah.
And you think, where are all those characters coming from? But so here you have the punctuation, numerals, all these diacritic special characters. And then we start to get into all the different scripts in the world. So Greek, Cyrillic, then you're talking Japan, Thailand. It just goes on and on and on. Chinese scripts, it just goes on and on. Indic script, it is like, there's a lot. So that's where all those characters go.
Yeah. But before we leave the diacritics, we had to throw this in only because we showed the Motley Crue slide. Simply to show Motley Crue that if you're really going to approach it as theater, and it's going to, it should be a joke because it's basically what it is. It was done much better and earlier by Hawkwind, the famous space rock band, in their 1971 album In Search of Space. So our feeling is if you're going to do it, go all the way. Just totally abuse the accents.
Well, you would be surprised at how many people have this particular question on their mind. We get an inordinate amount of traffic from people wondering what the answer to this question is. So if that happens to be you, or if perhaps you're listening to this tonight, let me clear you of your questions. The Facebook font is indeed Eric's Clavica, and you'll see it's right here, and it's slightly modified Clavica, but the base of it is Clavica.
Yeah. So just kind of, so we're all on the same page on that one. This is my typeface Clavica, shown in full version there. But let's back up a little bit. Again, back to the parallels. Again, I guess this is how I think about typefaces, and I'm always sort of gathering ideas, and I'm always collecting things, and even though I said in the interview on the poster I don't collect things, I guess I collect at least little jump-off points in my head. So anyhow, this is actually a photograph of a book about Jean Purvey, a designer who's incredibly important to me, and I really wanted this book. And actually, Nicole got this for me as a gift. And unfortunately, I have to say I haven't read it. And one of the reasons I haven't read it is what you see before you, which is Futura set more or less hard on top of itself in a 6-inch column. And I bring this to you not as I'm not the type police. I'm not trying to write a ticket. But I say this because this represents to me a very honest impulse on behalf of the graphic designer to set text in a way that's representative of the subject. And to me, that's graphic design. I mean, that's the real thing. And so this gets me to thinking, how can I, as a type designer, make something that is relevant for subject matter that is, for lack of a better word, contemporary or progressive or modern. And now, I think this book actually came out after Clavica was released, but you've all seen samples of this, and I'm referring, of course, to books about architecture or art or design, or for lack of a better word, coffee table books. Well, I buy these books. I mean, they're many times about subjects that are interesting to me. So this was a jump-off point for Clavicus. You know, how can I make something that could work in a situation like this? Another point. You know, sans serifs are, and this is a recent grab, this is just a few days ago. Sans serifs are completely ubiquitous at this point in terms of how we experience information on a daily basis. You know, whether it's with our iPhones or, you know, on the internet or whatever. We read sans serifs now. And so, as an example, International Herald Tribune, the articles are set in a sans serif. And they also have a function where you can even set it in 3 columns in a sans serif. But, you know, they're here to stay for sure for even what could be considered mild extended reading. And in many ways, that's for good reason. You know, a sans serif, in the case of the web, when treated well, can hold up better than a serif, depending on what it is. But so another thing that was on my mind when I was approaching Clavicus. Another jump-off point here, and this circles back to what I was talking about with the hand lettering. I'd like to say any people that can letter or any calligraphers, please look away right now. I didn't really learn hand lettering, but one of the things I started to learn along the way was italic handwriting. And italic handwriting, when done not by me, is pretty beautiful. And I suppose at the time I fancied that I could write thank you notes to people or something, and they would be blown away by my italic handwriting. But I've never. I think I addressed one thank you note once on the outside. Anyhow. What's interesting about italic handwriting, aside from all of these funny little manuals about it that you can find in used bookstores very easily, is that it's the basis of italics. And they're actually easier to make than Romans. And I was doing this at the time.
Did you just say that?
By hand.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
It scared me there for a minute.
Not drawing. And it threw me off. Okay, so at the time, you know, I had done a number of italics for typefaces where I had released to date, but I wasn't really happy with how they meshed with the Roman. And I thought if I kind of went back and figured out how to do it and create, you know, very much from my hand, I could sort of get a better understanding of it. And this is actually something I do to this day. Actually, both of us do this. We always use broad nib pens to sort of at least get ourselves out of a bind in terms of, you know, shape development. So this went into Clavicus as well. So as an example, Clavicus has, I guess, what, you know, type designers are what we would refer to as a true italic, which is to say it's drawn from the ground up, rather than the example on the bottom here, which is mechanically slanted or just simply, you know, moved to, or, you know, angled to the side. So in this case, that's just 10 degrees. And this is done for a few reasons. One, when you take a sample, as you have here on the bottom, and you just slant it, what happens is it optically tends to gain weight. It will look thicker. And the other thing that happens is the counters, you know, the spaces on the inside, you know, for instance down here, tend to look bigger. And so when you're drawing a so-called true italic, you know, you're reducing both the width and the stroke weight, aside from, you know, actually putting some left to right movement in the design as well. Another thing that worked its way into Clavicus, and I don't have a reason for this. I wish I did. I tend to always put some amount of like restricted modularity or geometry into my work. And when I say geometry, I don't mean that I have, you know, it's a circle and there's another circle and I've measured it out. It's just that it is sort of regulated, I suppose, by at least a feeling. And I jump back here. This is a typeface of mine, Stratum, and it was at least mildly successful, I thought, in the sense that rather than simply just taking a circular shape and sticking it on a stem, I sort of modulated the shape to mimic what is a little bit more of a drawn letter. And the result of that is you're able to set text a little bit better, and you're able to create something that has a little bit more movement to it. But the problem with Stratum still, and Stratum's, you know, fine display face and is used for a lot of, you know, advertising and things like that. And for instance, I'm really happy with how it's used in Metropolis magazine quite a bit. But what happens when you set a face like this in text is you create a pattern. And you can actually kind of see this pattern happening. And that pattern happens, of course, because there are shapes that are repeating and repeating and repeating. And what's important with a face, because remember, going all the way back here, we're trying to make something that could actually be used for, a mild amount of text, is you want to create a rhythm. And a rhythm leads you from left to right rather than a pattern which sometimes will circle back over itself, at least visually. So how do you do this? There are a number of ways, but one of the primary ways that I went about doing this with Clavicus was to, and this kind of circles back to the antique leaf example, is that I clipped the terminals. So the stratum typeface stratum that I was talking about, it rounds the corner, so here on the right. Clavicus, on the other hand, is clipped. And the benefit is that the ability to move from one character to the next is really sped up. And here it is set over the top stratum. And as you can see on the top one, ever so slightly, there's a little bit more of a left to right motion in the way the characters work. And it was funny, putting these slides together was only I realized that these are obviously from the same person. So I didn't even, at the time I didn't realize that so much. So here we are, this is Clavicus as it stands. And Clavicus was probably one of the first typefaces of mine that was, I would say, a little bit more of a complete set, with small caps and, multiple numeral styles and extended Latin and so on.
So, you never know when you're going to see one of Eric's typefaces in use, and that's the case here. We just happened to go on a website one day, and all of a sudden we saw that the NBC website was all Clavicus. It was pretty exciting. And then we found out that they had started using it for their entire on-air identity. They've since switched. They moved on to something else, but it's one of the... yes. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll take that one. One of the side benefits of having NBC use your typeface was that it was included in the spoof reality show on 30 Rock. And we just wanted to send a thanks out to the designers of 30 Rock, who are detail-oriented. There is Clavicus used in a spoof ad for a spoof reality show on 30 Rock. So there you have it.
So this is the poster that was used for the promotion of this lecture, designed by Atelier David Smith. And this, I really like this poster, but it also shows you the range that a typeface can go through, that in the hands of different designers, it becomes really a different typeface. This is another example. These are parts of a product, and the product is like for art presentation and portfolios. So these are all sorts of different pieces of the packaging. And then here's a close-up, and you can see Clavicus used here and then here. And then used again for TV purposes. I think almost all of this is Clavicus. Because Clavicus has straight sides, and it has a range of weights, it tends to render well on screen, so it's been used on screen quite a bit.
So my typeface Clavicus was kind of our entrance into a bigger pool of kind of clients, I suppose, or even customers as well. And when you release a typeface or when you create it, you hope for the best. You're exhausted and you've been working on it forever, and what happens happens. And if it leads to good things, that's great. Great. And Clavicus did totally unplanned. And one of those was in the summer of 2006, we were approached by Chevrolet. And they commissioned us to create a custom version of Clavicus, the normal width of Clavicus, which is up here on the top, and then also create a entirely new version for what literally amounts to the fine print. And so this is a really close-up shot of, the fine print of auto manuals and so forth. Okay, so moving on. So you're probably thinking to yourself, so here we go through these slides, and he's showing us all of these utilitarian, workhorse typefaces. I don't really have an answer to why I haven't made a serif typeface. I suppose I have made a few. Here's one quick, moving on. So I've actually made quite a few, but they just never seem to make it out the door. I suppose the thing is, sans serifs present in many ways a challenge that I feel like I'm never able to fully beat, and that I think it brings me back each time. And I feel like I'm after an ideal. And, well, yeah, I am after an ideal, and so I haven't hit it yet. But so here's a few letters from one I'm slowly nibbling on.
So Eric mentioned earlier that we learn type design in two completely different ways. Where Eric is self-taught, I actually went to school and studied typeface design. So I guess the logical question is why, since I have such a great resource sitting by me every single day, why would I go to all the trouble of going to school? And not only go to the trouble of going to school, but go all the way to England, which is, as you know, very far away. Eric started the Foundry, and he ran as a one-man show for quite a while. And then eventually I just started helping him with the website. It was as simple as that. And then as the business started to grow, the demands of the business became bigger and bigger, and I started taking on some of those roles as well. And eventually I was working part-time for the Foundry, and then also I was teaching part-time as well, which I really loved. The problem, though, in all of that is that I wasn't really making anything more. And having a background as a graphic designer, and just a designer, period, not even just graphic design, just as a designer, I felt at a loss. It just, something was a little bit off. So one day I decided to go study typeface design. So here, this is where I went. This is the studio at the University of Reading. So I went to the University of Reading, and that was in about 2006. We moved over to England. And I went to school primarily for a very simple reason. The ability to take an entire year off from your life. No work, no demands of teaching, literally no chores. I don't think I did an entire chore the time I was there. All I had to do was learn typeface design, and that was an amazing gift. So it's really simple. That's why I did it. There are, of course, other reasons, but that was really great to have all that time to spend doing that. So this is the typeface that I designed while I was at school. It's called Elena. And what you're looking at is a very refined draft, but it is a draft because I am not quite yet done. So this hasn't been released yet. So when you think, okay, I'm going to design a typeface, you have to start to narrow down your design decisions. And there were two things that were just obvious. They were sort of these huge outward things that I didn't bother to challenge. One was that I was in school, and I was there to learn typeface design. And what that meant to me was, rather than sort of having the end goal be a modular font, as Eric showed us, which is sort of the easiest font, I wanted my end goal to be the most rigorous of typeface sort of genres to design, which is something for extended reading. So that was my first criteria. Criteria number 2, that guy. He just told you that his thing is sans serifs, right? So there's no way that I'm going to sort of jump in his pool, so to speak. So I didn't touch the sans serif. I just said, okay, that's Eric's thing. I will bring a little bit of diversity to the Foundry, and I will design a serif typeface. So those are my first 2 criteria. A sort of third set of criteria that I wanted the typeface to do, and this is a sort of functional aspect, is that I wanted it to work in 2 sizes. I wanted to work at a display size, so a rather large size, 20, 30, 40 point. And then I also want it to work at a small size. And again, that's that extended reading, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 point. So what is the effect that this has on the design? You can see this is Dido. This is Adrian Frudiger's version of Dido. And you'll see it has it's a very high contrast face. So it has these beautiful thin lines that go into these relatively fat lines. So this, compared to this, it's a high contrast face. Now this looks really beautiful when it's big, but you can see this is it rendered in Photoshop. And the Photoshop grid is probably the most coarse grid that you can sort of put a typeface on, because the typeface has to conform to this really coarse grid. So you can see, this is the blow up, this is the sort of regular size, that it's starting to break up right here. So it looks great big, but when you get it small here, you can see that it's literally disappearing. Those important parts of the letters are totally disappearing. Now, So to correct this problem, what do? You beef up the serifs, right? And you beef up those joins. This is Carol Twombly's chaparral. I don't know what you guys think, but to me, when it's big, it looks a little goosey. I'll say that. So here it is blown up. You can see it holds up great small. So that's the benefit, right? You beef up those serifs and it really holds when it's small. So what I tried to do is, and how that affected the design, was to sort of shoot in the middle. I wanted to have a lower contrast face. This is mine in the middle. Again, this is Dido, and then this is chaparral again. So I tried to sort of shoot in the middle. Not so coarse as chaparral, but not as delicate and fine as Dido. So I just tried to shoot in the middle there. But of course, those are just sort of the functional and practical aspects of the design, right? That doesn't get us to what the typeface is going to look like in the end. And these are sort of the images and the sort of slice of culture that I was thinking of when I was designing Elena. Eric and I ran through this presentation a number of times before, and he said, I don't know about that slide, Nicole. I think it's confusing. And
it kind of is. What's the lady doing?
I don't know what she's doing. But he's right. It is totally confusing. Aside from whatever these ladies are doing, I don't know. But the thing I think that is confusing is, like Eric, I try to draw some parallels from not type, you're trying not to get your inspiration from type design because you're seeing a set of solutions that's already solved, right? You're trying to create your own new set of solutions. So, I'm trying to sort of draw inspiration from other places. And yeah, sometimes it gets a little confusing. How do you take something that's clearly abstract, all these abstract ideas, and get it into a typeface? So you're correct, it is confusing. But this was my sort of, I thought, this is what I want my typeface to look like. So you can see here it is in a big size. And you can also see that I designed a Greek component as well. And there's a lot of debate in the type design world about whether or not a type designer who does not speak, who does not understand, who is not culturally involved with a particular script, whether they should be designing a typeface for that script. And I think it's definitely a reasonable argument to have, because in the past there have been many scripts that have been dealt with by designers who in fact don't have any knowledge of the script, that have come out really poorly. So it's a really valid argument and a valid debate to have. So needless to say, when you sort of approach a script like this, you approach it with a lot of attention and care. And one of the ways to do that, the program director was Greek. It's become a sort of standard practice in type design today, is that if you do design a typeface for another script that you're unfamiliar with, to then have a native speaker who's also familiar with type design and the typographic conventions and the sort of cultural, that cultural knowledge to consult with you on that and help you develop that script. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And Jerry Leonidas, the program director, was who helps me do that. This is my typeface Elena. You'll see here it's set in German, and then here is also set in Greek. I think the next obvious thing is, well, how do you overcome the sort of feeling like, well, I can see this, I know it's in German, and I know it's in another language, but it makes some sense to me. Like, we all can figure out that this probably says typography. We all can figure out this probably says day 7. I can see the word typography. There's a professor's name in here. So I can't understand it, but I know these are words, and I can make the sounds, and it makes sense to me. And these begin to knit together as words and sentences, rather than this, which if you're looking at it like I was at the time, it just looks like a big jumbly mess, essentially. Of course, it's not a jumbly mess. So the way for me to get around that, and curiously, this was something that was really important for me, but other type designers said, actually that wasn't important for me. I didn't need to do that. I actually needed to see it in this other way. But the thing that was important for me was to actually begin to see those words and to see those start to knit into sentences and not just see it as this kind of really foreign thing. So yeah, it's really simple. I just started to learn Greek. I didn't actually learn Greek. I just started with some basic lessons. There were some lessons on iTunes, and just learned how to put sort of the sounds to characters. So when I look at this, I can see this says Thessaloniki, for example, and I can see this says typography. So it just helps me begin to see that these are actually characters, and from that I can be my type designer self, and I can say, okay, how do these things then, as characters, need to knit together? It's a start. So this is 2 versions. This is showing my typeface just in the program Font Lab. This is the italic that I designed for it, and then this is just the regular weight. The reason I wanted to talk about the italic is that, particularly as a student, there's a really important part of the design process that I wrestled with quite a bit when I was designing the italic, and that is failure. When you're a student, you don't always have that sort of long history of experience and practice to know what will work and won't work in the final design. So all you can do is just try until finally you arrive at the final solution. So that is the story of my italic, is a story of persistence in the face of continuing failure. And this is the italic that I designed initially when I was at school. And what you don't see on this screen is all the other many italics that came before this particular one. And now I'm going to show you a whole range that came afterwards. And yeah. So the problem with this italic for me was that when it was next to the Roman, this Roman is like, wow, that's being kind to myself. But to me, it's really buttery. It's really smooth. It has a very nice fluid movement from left to right. This italic, because the joins are so low and these are so high, they sort of really stand out against one another. And all that is in some ways the purpose of an italic. It was a little too much, and I felt it was too much sparkle on the page. So then I just started to kind of mess around and made these funny like semi-serifs. I thought, well, if I can sort of remove the fuss, then maybe I can get there. Nope. And then I thought, well, if the problem of the other one was that the join was so low, well, obviously, what's the solution? I'll just make the join higher. But if you look at this, you can see that it's particularly, as I sort of move my eye along, it's particularly wooden. It's very rigid, and sort of that grace of the italic is completely gone. So in my infinite wisdom, I thought, well, I'll take that join down a little bit lower. That makes a lot of sense, right? So that was this one. And I actually really like this. This is the exact same version. I really like this, but if this is my eye sort of rolling around in a sea of butter, this is sort of like my eyes rolling around in glass. And I thought,
Okay.
again, these two don't go together. So here I am. This is the final italic. Is this the solution? I don't know. But at some point, you just have to stop. So I think this is a good solution. I feel like these pair well together, and I'm stopping. That's another lesson that students need to learn. Sometimes you just need to stop. So I have a bold weight to do. I have more to finish on the entire typeface, but hopefully this year I'll get it out into the world.
Okay, we had to throw this in here. Gosh, probably about 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I got an email from a guy named Alan Kay, and from London, and he said, look, I don't have any money. Can you give me your typeface fake script? And we get this email actually quite a bit from students that say, can you give me fill in the blank typeface? And I swear I won't give it to my friends. Which point we say right. But anyhow, Alan seemed really different, and mainly because Alan's email was set in Courier, and it was hand broken. So I thought, this is my guy. And so a couple months later, this showed up at our door. And turns out Alan has a record label, and he makes all kinds of wonderful stuff all the time. And so after that, I was like, well, Alan, you can have all of our fonts, and you can do whatever you want with them. Alan has proceeded to do that, and he just sends us great stuff, and so we had to include it. This is Foundry Place, and probably the only person to ever use it kind of in a gradation, sort of like how I envisioned it. Another thing, Alan one day just emailed and he said, I have a record heading out the door. I don't have any fonts for it. What should we do? And so I said, I've got a little time. Let's and I mean little by like 6 hours. And so he's like, I need text and display. And so I'm like, okay, well, this is text and this is display. And so there it is. And he just sent me an MP3 and he's like, this is what it sounds like. What do you think? And so kind of away we went. And he always prints everything on kind of these really utilitarian, like rough stocks. This is actually an LP cover. There's the back, the text. Okay. Nicole mentioned earlier that one of the things that we do also are custom fonts. And, in the last couple of years we've done quite a few, and it, in many ways has taken up probably a good deal of our time. And so about a year and a half ago, we were approached by the New York Times Sunday magazine. And so most of you are probably familiar with the magazine. Of course, it comes in, in the Sunday Times. And it's really an institution. It's been around since the late 1800s. Initially it was actually the opinion section, contained the opinion part of the Times. And so we were approached by the art directors, Gail and Rem, and they said, we would like to commission a sans serif, and we needed to work as an information sans, but we also needed to work as a display face. It would also be nice if it worked in between there somewhere as well, and basically we needed to do everything. And so at the time, the magazine was using, kind of as the core of the magazine was Helvetica, Garament, Cheltenham, and Stymie. And so the mission was to replace Helvetica, and in part. And Helvetica at the time was used as what I call an information sans, which is to say it was kind of the heavy lifting. It was little captions. It was, the magazine always has recipes in the back. It was kind of done for all of that. And they weren't really using a sans as a regular display face in the magazine. And so that was the challenge. And early on, one of the things that the art director started to do was send us actual layouts from the magazine, but they were subbing in my typefaces. And they had a few of my typefaces that they were using at the time for their own projects that they liked. So here's Clavicus in the magazine. Here's Locator in the magazine. And so we use this as a jump-off point, kind of to get a discussion going, but also to sort of talk about particulars, how is this working well, how is this not? So for instance, in the case of Locator, it's pretty wide. Too much for an editorial situation. Clavicus, probably too boxy. That's sometimes, discussions are that basic, and you're kind of left to move forward with that. So very early on, one of the things I started to do was sketch alongside Stymie. Stymie is, I'm always kind of taken by these typefaces like Stymie that have a weight in them that are a total anomaly. Bell Gothic comes to mind as well, but Bell Gothic Black, it's like it has nothing to do with the rest of the typeface. It has straight sides, the rest of the typeface are kind of round. Stymie's the same way. On the top, up here, this is Stymie Extra Bold. Down here is, I believe, Stymie Light or Stymie Regular. It's like they're kind of related, and I like the bottom one because it's pretty ugly, and they don't really use it very much, but one of the things that they do use a lot is Stymie Extra Bold, like a lot. And it's kind of, it's almost an institution at this point with the magazine. You see it, I just see that, which is fake text, and I think New York Times Sunday magazine. So I started sketching alongside that, and I knew that it had to work with Stymie. So, obviously I started thinking, well, Stymie sans. It's somehow like this thing that I would make, but that worked for about 3 hours, and so I just tried to mimic, I suppose, the interchange of white and black, and that worked for a few days. And I simply started to try to make something that felt like it worked well with Stymie. So another thing that we determined early on was that it had to have a wide range of weights. And as a type designer, one of the things that I'm fascinated by are people that work for publications that don't change, which is to say people that are designers for a publication that comes out every day or every few days or every week. I always think that's kind of interesting. It's like this object that you're working towards or for never changes, and the opportunity to inject either proportion or scale or difference is incredibly limited. It's the same size. It's not like it's going to change. So I think that's where type design can kind of contribute there. I mean, type design through a range of weight is able to offer a whole different set of contrasts and emphasis. And so it was with this that we determined that it had to have a pretty wide range of weights. Now, Sunday is the name of the typeface. I think it's 7 weights at this point, was drawn from the ground up as a 3-master typeface. So these 3 drawings that you see in front of you for the Roman were all drawn from scratch. That's roughly like a super light on top, and then a regular in the middle, and a black on the bottom. And then the same for the italics. So there were 6 masters from the ground up. And I should also add, we had a decent amount of time in terms of a custom project, which in this case is 6 months. Sometimes, we get people that say, can you do it in 2 weeks? And we say no, because that's fast, really fast. Early on, one of the things that we started to do with all of these masters was create instances. And what you see here is a scale. So you remember the previous slide, and here are the mathematical interpolations between those extremes. And this is important because what we're able to do is start mocking things up quickly. And so actually right there on the left, those are just notes. We started trading PDFs back and forth quite a bit throughout the process. Nicole alluded to this earlier. In terms of technology, we draw everything in FontLab from the ground up. But we do have a number of tools, aftermarket tools, that we use that are really important to our workflow. And one of them is the suite of RMX tools, actually created by our friend Tim Ahrens. And they're simply a set of Python scripts that attach to the back of FontLab. And what's important about them is we're able to kind of set parameters that we can manipulate with these masters. So what you see here in the blue is Sunday regular. And then in the black in the black color is the black weight. And so we're able to manipulate some of the parameters here. And what's different from this than, say, morphing something in Illustrator is that by using these masters, you're able to kind of control the results.
You're able to control, for example, the stem, maybe the horizontal versus the vertical independently.
Independently, yeah.
You can't do that in Illustrator. You can't say make this 50, but make this 100. That doesn't work.
And not in a systematic way. Another tool that we use is Superpolator. This allows us to create very, very tight and clean metrics and kerning for our instances as well. So with all this technology, of course, you get a lot of instances. And what's important about that, though, is it allows us to create a lot of situations that we can evaluate and then either keep it or redo it and kind of move forward. So the art directors early on started giving us these proofs, which, this is the typeface we were trying to replace, which is Helvetica. So there's Helvetica set against Stymie. And there is one of the early versions of Sunday Light set against Stymie. Here's a closer shot of that. I believe this is actually Helvetica Light. And so what you have below are 2 minor variations of Sunday Light. And I show these because as a type designer, I'm kind of, the light and the medium are really important to me. I think they always end up feeling spongy or weak or timid. And I think there's a real challenge there to get them to hold like a crisp line and look like they should be there in the range of weight, rather than something that's just there because you can. So the difference that we're talking about here on these 2 samples is that, which is 20 units. 20 units makes a huge difference in terms of page color and in the way you can kind of hold a line on the paper. So type designers, we spend our days
Agonizing over 2 units, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So here is where the typeface for the Times stands at the moment. And it's starting in again. It's being expanded. I was working on it today. And it's a big family, and of course it has italics as well. And there are also a few optically tuned display versions as well. For instance, here in the Merksauer record line, that is a version that is slightly condensed, but with the horizontals kind of beefed up for display sizes. And so it's in that I should say that I'm happy with how the typeface works for information. I'm happy with how it works in the lightweights for the big sizes. I don't think it's been as successful in big sizes, really bold, just yet. I feel like I got about 3/4 of the criteria in. I guess that actually is a bold. That doesn't look too bad. So there's a larger shot. And these, I think, are, well, for instance, this shot here is, I think, from the first issue of the new, when it was rolled out about a year ago. Here's a smaller slide I wanted to show. One of the things I think it ended up doing pretty well, and one of the things I was really shooting for was, if you've ever had this, if you have a copy of the Sunday Times magazine, the paper is terrible. And the art directors will just outright tell you that. And if you've ever kept a copy, say for a year or so, it'll actually eat itself. It's acidic paper. It just kind of vanishes after a while, and it's very cheap, and that's why it's used. And so one of the things I wanted to do was be able to kind of deal with that and create something that could work under pretty much the worst conditions. So the slide over here, image on the left there, that's actually Sunday. I believe that is the bold and the light set over the text size of Garamond that is used in the magazine. So that's probably 5 or 6 point maybe for use for Sunday there. I think it holds.
So
Okay.
yeah, you've made it to the end. This is the final interruption, and this is our last set of slides. Our favorite part of these sort of lectures is always seeing where people work. So that's how we decided to end on this. And we tried to show all of our studios that we've ever worked in, but we just couldn't get that far. We got back to about 2004. And so in doing that, what really happened is that we ended up, it really became like this journey to England is really what this will be, and a journey of how we lost a lot of sort of workplace stability, I guess, in doing so. And that's why studios is in quotes, because some of the places we've worked are not so glamorous. This is an excellent example. Here we are in St. Paul. This is when we were in St. Paul. This is about 2004.
That's not terrible.
Yeah, it's not so bad. We've shared a long plywood, about 8-foot plank for, well, we still have one.
For years.
Yeah, for years. So this is when we lived in St. Paul. When I decided to go to school in England, we had to sell our place. And you'll see the dog is in all of the photos because we used to have a website about the dog where we took photos every day of the dog. So when we were culling all of this stuff, the shots that we had all had the dog in them because that's what we were taking the photo of. So we had to, when we moved to England, we needed to sell our place. But in doing so, there was a 6-month gap between when we sold our place and then when we actually had to move it to England. So we had to find a place to go.
So we ended up here. One of the things we always thought would be really cool was move to the family cabin.
Yeah, like an experiment. What if you dropped us down into rural Minnesota where there's like nothing, and what would happen? Would we kill each other, or would we be happy, or what would happen?
Yeah, why not? And so we found a place where we could get satellite internet. We had a satellite installed, and it was great. It was awesome. We would swim during lunch, and we had beautiful weather all summer, and it was just excellent. Here we are working in the basement.
You can see Eric got an upgrade. He got a plywood stand, a little bit of an upgrade.
I made that stand.
Good for you.
I still have it, actually. I still use it. And there's Charlie. I think it's actually a thunderstorm. He's a little freaked out. So I like this photo. I wanted to include this because I always like, I have a lot of type specimens and things like that, and I'm sure you've seen these historical photos of type foundries. They're like these massive institutions. They occupy a city block. Here is the modern type foundry in a truck, which, type designers work at home. Type design is now, it was huge, and now it's gone back in size, and so there it is in a truck.
Yeah. And we've always worked at home because, when Eric first started out, of course, it made sense financially for him to work at home. But as we've sort of progressed, we think about, someday we'll have a studio and we'll, drive to this place. And then we think, that's not efficient, and I have to drive there, and I can't wear my robe there, and all that kind of stuff.
My robe.
Well. So this is where we moved to in England. This is Reading. Reading is about 25 minutes west of London by train ride. So it has a great proximity to London, but none of the glamour of London, but the high rent of London, so isn't that great? The sort of big main attraction of Reading is this mall right here called the Oracle. I often say it's like the Bloomington of Minnesota because of England, excuse me, because Bloomington has a huge mall and Reading has a huge mall. They're both sort of suburbs. There you go. This was just my desk in England. We had a terraced house, and there was a plus room off one of the bedrooms, and it was a little bit bigger than a closet, not much though. And so this is my desk, very spare. We took 6 pieces of luggage to England. Not everything could make it. We did bring the dog though. So you can see there's sort of light filtering in here, and this was our view out of that window, which...
this was the non-glamorous part Nicole was referring to.
Yeah. So this isn't just a fine part of Reading, but it has sort of very typical English characteristics. You've got the gray sky, you've got the inordinate amounts of red brick, you've got some exposed plumbing. And the reason that we took this is snowing. So this is the one day out of 2 that we were there that it snowed, and you can see it's already melted off by the time we had grabbed the camera.
All right, so back to the States, back to the plywood desk, and we're actually still here. This is, we're just down on Washington Avenue. We are scenically between Deja Vu and Bunkers. So we're here, but this is all for a greater cause, which Nicole will describe a little bit more.
So we are designers. Every day and every minute of our lives, essentially, we are designers, and that's the way that we think. When we came back to England, of course, the first thing that we did is we want the stability back in our lives. We are tired of being transient beings. So we looked around for houses. The problem with housing as it stands now, when you go to look at houses, they're built for living. You sleep there, you eat there, you watch TV there, you watch movies there, but you don't work there. And if you do want to work there, what happens is you get either shoved into a basement or you get shoved into a tiny little room. And we thought, this is 8 hours of our day, 9 hours of our day, 10 hours of our day. I don't want to be shoved into that little room. I'm not going to be creative that way. That's not, there must be a design solution to this challenge that's set before us. So before this sort of economic meltdown, we decided to build a house and build a studio.
So here it is. It has a roof now, so we're working away on that, and it's designed by Laser Office in Flatpack, and so there it is. Our studio is half the size of our house, more or less. I think that kind of represents how we approach things, and so there you have it. We are definitely looking forward to the separation of work here's work, here's home. That's 10 feet.
The 10-foot commute.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so.
That's it. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming tonight.
We have a few minutes for some questions and answers. There's going to be some ushers with microphones in the aisles, and because we're webcasting, we'd like to capture your questions. So if you could raise your hand, and then they can pass in the mic to you. Other side. Oh, no one's going to break the ice. It's the Minnesota ice. Minnesota ice. Someone will break it. see very well.
I was just, oh, that's loud. I was just wondering, when you're working with a big company like NBC, when you see your typeface up there, how does the sales work with that way? Do they just purchase it once and they can use it as much as they want, or I don't know. That's just kind of the question I had.
That's a good question. That's something we talk about ourselves actually quite a bit. Nicole could probably better handle that one.
Yeah, so the thing that I was going to say before MILF Island came up, I sort of screwed that slide a little too quickly, was that, you know, a lot of people ask us how we get NBC to buy our typeface, and we don't. We're not good at getting clients, and we're not that great at getting customers. They somehow find their way to us. So NBC, from the lore that I've read on the internet, actually picked that typeface, and then Capacity, the design agency, they were the one who then took that typeface and designed the identity. So we had no discussions with NBC. And what happens is they essentially, you know, NBC or Capacity, whoever is actually using the typeface, they buy a license to that typeface, and however many computers that typeface is installed on, that's what they pay for. And so, you know, if they need 100 computers, then that's, you know, price A. If that's just one computer and one designer, then that's a much smaller price.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think NBC ended up being like 100, something like that. Yeah. So in the scheme of things, not a lot, really.
Some foundries do have some restrictions on how they can use typefaces. For example, some don't allow broadcasting without a special licensing. We don't happen to be one of them, though.
Nicole, could you say something about how you chose the program at Reading and what you got out of it and what the curriculum was like?
Yeah, sure. There aren't that many typeface design programs, period. So it's actually not that hard to choose. There are essentially two ones that have sort of a long history that you can look at the students and kind of figure out what you're going to be getting into. So in terms of choosing, there's basically Reading, and then there's KEBK, and there are some new programs that are coming up. But it's in I don't know. I mean, it just felt right to go to Reading. I mean, I don't know why. KEBK is a great school. So why I chose Reading, I can't really say. It just seemed to sort of fit with my personality. It was a great experience. I had a great time. Reading focuses a lot. There's basically two parts of the program, which is doing research and writing, and then also the practical side, what they call the practical side, which is actually designing your typeface. So unfortunately, I spent quite a bit of time writing when I would have preferred to be designing typefaces. But I can tell you a whole lot about the education of a typeface designer, because that's what I wrote my dissertation on, so we can have a chat about that later. But it's a great program. I would recommend it if you're so interested.
Besides not paying for your typefaces, are there particular pet peeves about designers using your work that you wish we wouldn't?
I did get asked that. Not really. You know, the thing is, I think sometimes, for instance, I get asked, you know, what is it you really don't like that people do with your typefaces? And you know, I think the only one that, you know, the one that you mentioned, that's probably it. You know, it's something I created, and it's, you know, we're just a little foundry. It's the two of us, and when someone doesn't pay for it, yeah, that's kind of crazy. But as far as you know, people stretching them out, or, you know, squishing them in, or, you know, various, you know, typographic kind of no-nos, no, and mainly because I think that. And I think I mentioned this a little bit in that Privé book, was that I think that does represent an impulse on behalf of graphic designers to try to make fonts do something that they're not. And I see that a lot. There are a lot of things where people take our typefaces and kind of squish them in or cut them up or whatever. And I'm actually not totally opposed to that in some ways. I'm interested to see what graphic designers do with these things that I've made, and because I'm making them for graphic designers. I think if I had to throw another one in, is when fonts get modified to the point where, if somebody's making a logo out of it and it gets modified to the point where it's 100% something else, or totally kind of just beat up. I often kind of wonder why it was picked at all. You know, I feel like maybe somebody else could have done a better job. Maybe I wasn't maybe the best choice, you know, but I suppose those are nitpicky things, so.
I'm just kind of curious, you were talking before about designing your typeface for other languages. Kind of where does the line of it go? Like, what languages do you kind of choose to dig into in terms of like what you can actually make the typeface for? I mean, you're not going into Arabic or Chinese, but what would an Arabic, Bryant look like, I guess? I mean, so how do you kind of make those decisions?
Well, an Arabic Bryant sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
I think that you have to know what your limits are. I mean, you'll see today that a lot of typeface designs, and particularly typeface designs that include Greek scripts, that have been done by primarily Westerners, that include Greek scripts or Arabic components. Many times those are collaborations, and there are many people. For example, Eric did a custom typeface for Thomson Reuters, and that typeface started out as the base of Locator. They squished it in a little bit, but then they wanted to add Greek and Cyrillic components. So Eric didn't say, "Yeah, I know how to do that. I'm gonna jump right on that." He said, "That's sort of beyond the scope of what I know to date. So I'm gonna seek help on that." And so he had two other designers well versed in those scripts design those typefaces. And it's simply not possible to. It's hard enough to know. Just that character set that Eric showed with the OpenType and the extended Latin character set, it's hard enough sometimes just to get those characters correct, because you think, oh, I'll just put a line on that D and that'll be it, that'll be good. But that's someone's language, and it's important to someone, and that's a part of someone's name, and those characters are really important. So it's hard enough to, in some ways, just to get all of those cultural sensitivities into a typeface as it exists. So it's even harder to then, as you begin to expand out into certain scripts. So I think what you're seeing is type designers really specializing in particular scripts, and that makes a lot of sense to me, because there's no way one person could know Japanese and Thai and Indic scripts, and there are a number of Arabic scripts, and it's just not possible, I think.
The baseline for us is extended Latin. That's what we consider a basic font. And maybe Greek and Cyrillic after that, which is sometimes referred to as a WGL font, which is Windows Glyph List. But yeah, extended Latin is the bottom, basic, beginning.
For patrons or other corporations commissioning fonts or commissioning versions of fonts, do you see that as on the rise or on the decline?
You mean recently with the developments in the economy, or?
Or just with
general?
changing awareness of kind of what fonts can do for an identity?
Yeah, I think overall, yes. And I say that for a few reasons. We've been involved in the past couple of years, we've been involved with some pretty big agencies that have commissioned fonts on behalf of corporations. And I have to say that I'm kind of surprised by the way that agencies are up to speed in terms of licensing and what that means then for the client in terms of money. Because look, when you need 100,000 seats of a license for a font, that's a lot of money. And if you make a custom version, if you commission us to make a custom version of it, we're also packaging, if the situation fits, we're also packaging the licensing with that as well. And the thing that we suggest in that case is that it's unlimited licensing. The corporation, it's nearly impossible for the way corporations sort of expand and contract for them to ever keep track of these things. So for instance, Chevrolet, they have an unlimited license of Clavicus. They're able to give it to their vendors as they need to, and so they go. And for instance, we did the same thing with Thomson Reuters. But I say yes, because I think, the way that the agencies have handled it, we've been fortunate in who we've dealt with. And we're also very careful about how we approach things. I think when we accepted the Chevrolet job a few years back, we realized early on that we were in way over our heads. And we got a lawyer that he sort of gives us a little bit of advice, and he's been very helpful and kind of gentle on us. So.
Yeah, and I think to get a little bit closer to your question, there's always the notion of differentiation, which brands always want to do. So I think typeface is a part of that. And the other side of that, too, is, of course, what we were just talking about. Brands are global brands. They're no longer just in America anymore. So a company wants that brand to be cohesive across all of those different languages. So guess what they need? They need a typeface that does all of those things. And there aren't many typefaces. There aren't enough typefaces to get that differentiation and then also expand, have all those characters in them. So with Thomson Reuters, that was another aspect of it. And, they write us and they say, do you know of, I can't remember what the set was, but like, do you know Korean, Japanese fonts that would work with your fonts? Mm-hmm. So I think there is some. But with the economy, I don't know, we'll see.
I have just one quick thing. The typeface for the New York Times is the only custom typeface of any scale that we've been involved with that is only in the United States. Everything is totally borderless now for us and type.
Okay, you said that you usually work on projects for quite a long time. How do you stay motivated during that time and keep working on projects that seem to go on for quite a while?
That's a good question. It really depends. We're different actually in how we work. So I could just say how I do it. I work on several at the same time. That's it. I have probably 2 in the front burners and then maybe 3 or 4 kind of simmering in the back. And it just depends on how things are going. And sometimes things take off and I really have a momentum, and other times it doesn't work out so well. Also client work kind of sprinkled in between, which is always on a schedule. And so, my own kind of self-initiated stuff is almost like a treat, sort of a relief.
Yeah, I think because we have a lot of investment in our business, that means that we answer customer emails during the day, and we provide quotes to people during the day, and we answer the phone, and so we have a lot of duties. So in some ways, like I haven't worked on my typeface in probably a month, I would say, because I haven't had time to get to it. So in some ways, it's it is a treat actually to work on type design. But yeah, I don't know how. It's a good question. You tell me when you figure it out.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this evening. We'll see you back next week.